Welcome to Survival Strategies for Anyone Who Loves a Gambling Addict. Together, we'll learn to build a bubble around ourselves where peace, joy, serenity, and financial security can exist, regardless of what our gamblers choose to do and the chaos they create. This podcast is intended for mature audiences and includes topics and language that may not be suitable for young children. Listener discretion is advised. I'm Jodi, your podcast host. Over the years, the gambling industry, the states, the healthcare providers, well, they've all introduced their own terminology where defining gambling addiction is concerned, and I'm sure for their own professional reasons. But does the ever increasing list of vocabulary terms resonate with families impacted by someone else's gambling addiction the same way that it does for the industry and clinicians? Or are these overlapping terms confusing and misleading? I'll let you decide how much weight and value to place on one over the other. I want to be clear, I'm not sharing clinical explanations here. Instead, this is my best explanation as a layperson with lived experience. It's a framework intended to help make the chaos families are living in feel a little more understandable. The first term I think is very important to know is process addiction. Process addiction, also called behavioral addiction or behavioral process addiction, is a term used to describe patterns where a person feels compelled to engage in certain behaviors because they're rewarding, even when those behaviors become painful. The diagnosis of process or behavioral addiction formally debuted in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders in 2013, creating a new category for non-substance addictions. Before that, a gambling addict seeking treatment would have been diagnosed with something else if insurance was to pay, something like bipolar or manic depression or anxiety. I saw it 100 times. Think about that for a minute. Gambling was legalized in Vegas in 1931, and the process addiction associated with gambling addiction was finally recognized in 2013, over 80 years later. In Colorado, where I live, gambling was legalized in 1990, and we waited 23 years for the addiction to gambling and the behavior compulsion to be recognized by the medical community. That's a lot of unrecognized and untreated damage. For our purposes, the rewarding behavior this definition talks about is the act of gambling. And when people think about gambling, they think about the bet, the act of putting money on a table and either winning more or losing it all. That is not a complete observation of this addiction. For families affected by gambling, what becomes clear over time is that the bet itself is often only one small part of a much larger behavior pattern. Many spouses and parents report that the anticipation, the secrecy, justification, and manipulation around gambling can feel just as powerful, sometimes more powerful, than the gambling itself. What we come to realize through lived experience is that our gamblers are addicted to the action, the lying, the scheming, getting away with the con. They are addicted to the manipulation, the gaslighting, and the emotional and sometimes physical abuse. They are addicted to the grandiosity and the immaturity and selfishness. They are addicted to this self pity and victim mentality. The dopamine in their brain is not held off at the gates, waiting for the bet before it flows to the pleasure center of the brain. Their dopamine starts flowing when any of these behaviors are engaged for any reason. What many families recognize in hindsight is that the emotional high seems to begin as soon as the process starts, when obligations are cleared, when secrecy takes hold, when the possibility of gambling becomes real. By the time the gambler arrives at the casino or picks up their phone to engage an app, families often say the shift in personality is already complete. The gambler feels different, engaged, alive, confident, known. Whether that feeling comes from chemistry, conditioning, or environment matters less to families than the lived impact, which is that this version of the gambler feels more present to gambling than to the people in their home. Here is an example. Maybe your gambler is a casino gambler, and maybe their process begins with a lie that clears the calendar of their obligations. Maybe they call their boss around noon and say, "Hey, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to leave work early today. Got another sick kid. My wife set the doctor's appointment, but she can't help out. Sorry, man. I'll make sure I get you that report tomorrow." And this happens a lot. And the lies get more elaborate as time goes on because everything in the process is progressive. Then he calls his wife and says, "Hey, honey, my dumb boss just told me I have to work late. God, I hate this job. Don't wait up. I'll be late. I love you." And this happens a lot. He now has 12 hours to gamble, and nobody is going to be wondering where he is. Brilliant. He is brilliant. Then he gets into his car and he drives down the highway, past the images and landmarks that send the message to his brain that he is on his way to meet his lover. When he arrives, he parks in his familiar parking lot and he enters his favorite casino. The smell to him is wealth and prominence, and it feels like putting on a favorite sweater on a stormy day. It's comforting. He is greeted like a rock star, and they know him by name, and they wish him luck. He is known, and he is loved because he is good. Maybe one of the best at this game. He makes his way to his favorite blackjack table or slot machine where his favorite drink is waiting because they really like him here. He's like family. He takes a deep breath and then the betting begins. That is this gambler's process. The dopamine does not sit idle until the gambler makes his first bet. The dopamine starts flowing back when he calls his boss. And it keeps flowing as he lies, as he orchestrates the con, as he drives up the highway, patting himself on the back for being so clever. The dopamine flows when he is recognized and his ego and grandiosity are fed. The dopamine is released when the process behaviors are engaged, and placing the bet is just one of those behaviors. And when the process is interrupted, when plans fall apart or access is blocked, in this example, what happens if the boss says, "Sorry, buddy, you can't leave this afternoon. Please call your wife and get that appointment rescheduled. We've got an important meeting today. Did you forget? You've got to be there. Your job depends on it." Families often report a sudden emotional crash. That crash can show up as anger, withdrawal, resentment, or blame. And the family has no idea what has triggered it. Without context, it can look like cruelty or hostility, emotional instability, definitely, or a number of other diagnosable mental disorders, when in reality, it is simply that something was anticipated and was lost. In this example, the self pity and victimization are going to flood in when the boss says you can't go meet your lover. The emotional swing from the anticipation of meeting that lover to the reality of having to live your mundane life with your crappy job, which probably isn't crappy, and your ungrateful wife, who most likely is not ungrateful. It's almost like he just lost a bet. He is low and depressed. And the wife and kids, well, they have no idea why dad just walked through the door acting like some kind of monster. They will question what they could have done wrong. They will walk on eggshells for the evening. They will try to be overly accommodating. The family is perceived as the enemy, the barrier keeping the gambler from their true love. And the family will not win. While substance addictions and gambling addiction share meaningful similarities, families often notice important differences. One of the most striking is how quickly and how severely gambling can impact finances and stability. A gambler may lose a home, a vehicle, or a retirement fund in a matter of hours without any outward physical signs that something has gone wrong. For families, behavior matters as much as the gambling itself. The behaviors are often the earliest warning signs that safety, emotional or financial, may be at risk. And as family, knowing what those behaviors are is critical. Now, I need to make one clarification here. Knowing about process addiction, knowing what it is and how it presents itself, and being able to identify the process behaviors associated with your gambler is not going to keep your loved one from gambling. Instead, this knowledge allows us as the family to be alert and aware of those behaviors that threaten our peace, our serenity, our joy, and our financial security. It allows us to have our eyes wide open. That is process addiction, one layperson's explanation. Moving on, I can't tell you how many spouses, parents, and children will come into a support meeting and say, I don't know if my gambler is a compulsive gambler or a problem gambler. He says he's a professional gambler. Or my son's therapist says he's not a gambling addict, he just does harm when he gambles. From a family perspective, these terms frequently blur together. While clinicians, insurers, governments, and industries may need precise distinctions, families tend to care about something far simpler. Is this gambling causing me emotional or financial pain? I'm going to be very straightforward here. For many of these terms, we're really talking about the same thing: potato, potato. These distinctions can start to feel like semantics. Remember, we're not diving into scientific or therapeutic definitions here. We're not writing a thesis or white paper. We're trying to make sense of what's happening in real life. And all of this conflicting language often makes that harder not easier. Term number one, the oldest and most recognizable and understood term is gambling addict or gambling addiction. Sorry, folks, this is what it's called, an addiction to gambling. Called that since the beginning of time. We still use the term drug addiction or substance abuser, and everyone knows what that means. We use the term alcoholic, alcohol addiction, and alcohol abuser, and everyone knows exactly what that means. The impacts of addiction are universally understood. I specifically chose to use the term gambling addict and gambling addiction for my podcast for one practical reason. When families are desperate, when they are on the edge of losing everything, as well as their minds and souls, when they fear for the very lives of their loved ones, they are going to Google, is my husband a gambling addict? Does my son have a gambling addiction? And I don't want people who are suffering to get lost in potato. Term number two, compulsive gambling. According to the Mayo Clinic, compulsive gambling, also called gambling disorder or gambling addiction, is the uncontrollable urge to keep gambling despite the toll it takes on a life. Compulsive gamblers are willing to risk something they value in the hope of getting something of greater value. According to Gamblers Anonymous, a compulsive gambler is a person whose gambling has caused growing, continuing, and uncontrollable problems in their life. Gamblers Anonymous has been around since 1957, and they have called themselves compulsive gamblers since then. And I guarantee you there's no chance they will ever adopt any other term to describe their addiction to gambling. The term compulsive gambler is not going anywhere. Term number three, problem gambling. Problem gambling is any betting or wagering behavior that causes significant disruption or damage to a person's life, including their finances, relationships, career, or emotional health. Hmm, that sounds a little bit like compulsive gambling. In my previous episode, Jodi Bechtold told us of her experience with the IRS when she was attempting to get an NGO approved for the Problem Gambling Certification Board. And they did not like the term gambling. They needed to have a word in front of it they understood, and they understood the term problem. It was a government requirement and may not be so meaningful to those in the thick of it. Term four, gambling harm. Gambling harm is the most widely adopted term right now. Why? I honestly don't know. It's typically defined as any negative consequence or detrimental impact arising from gambling, whether that affects a person's health, finances, relationships, or work. It's a broad umbrella ranging from short term regret to serious long term consequences like bankruptcy, mental illness, or even suicide, with ripple effects on families and communities. From my perspective, harm is the outcome and gambling is the cause. How would we apply that to an alcoholic? When I drink alcohol, I do harm, but that doesn't mean I'm an alcoholic? It's very confusing to me. What I find even more confusing is how frequently the terms gambling addict, compulsive gambling, and even problem gambling have been replaced almost entirely by gambling harms across state agencies, the industry, and many mental health providers. I'm not sure what problem this change was meant to solve. I tend to think in terms of understanding the harm caused by gambling addiction. When language focuses only on the outcomes, it can start to feel like we're losing sight of the behavior that produced those outcomes. Maybe that shift in focus is intentional. Maybe you're someone whose gambling can cause harm, but you're not actually a compulsive gambler. I honestly don't know. To me, it adds an extra layer of confusion and subtly changes where responsibility appears to land. That said, it is the most label free term we have right now. And perhaps that was the goal. Maybe you're smarter than me, but I don't see a measurable difference between gambling addict, compulsive gambler, problem gambler, and gambling harm. Okay, maybe it's meaningful to a gambler, which is not my target audience. Maybe the gambler feels better being told they do gambling harm rather than being labeled a gambling addict. Maybe the loss of gambling feels less permanent if we call it problem gambling rather than compulsive gambling, because problems can be solved. I really don't know. Maybe for the medical world, they had to take the word addict out to get the medical code assigned. Maybe we want addiction counselors to see gambling differently than substance addiction. So the name was changed to problem gambling. I don't know. Maybe the industry or the casinos really loved the term gambling harm because it doesn't tie their product to a lifelong abstinence. This new gambling harm term leaves the door just a little bit open. I really don't know. I'm just guessing because the reasons for all of these terms have never been communicated. I have been in the company of gambling addicts and their families for 35 years, and never once have I ever recognized a difference between someone who identifies their loved one as a compulsive gambler versus a problem gambler versus a gambling addict, or versus one who does gambling harm. If it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and paddles like a duck, maybe it's a duck, potato, potato. I think we can agree that all of them sound like someone else's gambling causes us pain. Here's my advice: don't get caught up in the semantics. Instead, just ask yourself, has my loved one's gambling robbed me of my peace, joy, serenity, or financial security? Do I carry the burden of guilt, shame, and insecurity because of my loved one's behavior when they gamble? If so, the specific label matters far less than the lived reality. So let's talk about the recreational or responsible gambler. This is the group that knows their limits and walks away having had fun. I would define a recreational or responsible gambler as someone who plans ahead to gamble. They use some of their entertainment money to participate in gambling, whether it's a trip to a mountain casino town or a game with friends. It's planned and budgeted. No household bills are in jeopardy because of this entertainment. They don't use all their entertainment money to gamble. They have other outside interests that they can afford to pay for, like mountain biking or crafting or playing tennis or traveling. They still go on hikes and meet friends for dinner and drinks. Because of this, they don't have the emotional swings and isolation when they gamble. and gambling does not impact their character. Could recreational or responsible gamblers become problem gamblers? Yes. Many people who struggle with gambling addiction describe having passed through a recreational or responsible phase first. My husband would tell you his stay in the recreational responsible group was brief, maybe a couple of months before his gambling became a compulsive addiction. We've all seen or heard the responsible gaming ads. Bet what you can afford, set your limits, know when to stop. These messages are primarily aimed at the recreational or responsible gambler in order to prevent crossing the line into addiction. This group is generally experiencing entertainment, and many have not yet experienced a disconnect between behavior and consequence, or the way the gambling process itself can start to feel rewarding in ways that go beyond the outcome of the bet. I know people who go up to the casino routinely. This is their inexpensive anniversary or birthday trip. They get a room, have the free buffet, and gamble 200 bucks. They go together, they enjoy together, and they leave together. Or there are people who place a few bucks in a fantasy football league and are not shaken or motivated by the menial winnings or the menial losses. Yes, there are many people who can gamble recreationally, responsibly, for life. We don't know why some people can walk away and some people can't. Addiction remains a mystery in that way. It's a mystery and a reality all at the same time. Now, on to the big controversial term in the glossary, professional gambler. In my experience, many, if not all, people who struggle with a gambling addiction spent time believing or needing to believe that they were professional gamblers. That belief can feel protective. It can preserve dignity, hope, and the idea that control still exists over gambling. In many cases, it's just delusional. Rather than debating definitions over what is a professional gambler, it can be more useful to look at what typically does not align with professional gambling. Debt. A professional gambler does not have gambling related debt. This means they don't take out loans in order to gamble, and they sure don't engage in high interest predatory loans or credit cards. Professional gamblers do not ignore the math. They stop gambling when they're ahead. They do not owe their family members or friends or employers money. They have their own money. Professional gamblers don't evade or delay taxes because taxes are as much a part of their job as it is any working person. Professional gamblers don't shirk the responsibility of tracking business expenses like mileage, food, maintenance, because they are professional, self employed individuals. How about their finances and belongings? Professional gamblers don't have to rely on someone else to put a roof over their head, food in their belly, or clothes on their back. A professional gambler does not need someone else to co sign on a car. Professional gamblers don't risk their retirement or financial future for a gamble. They save. Professional gamblers do not gamble with living expense money. How about their character? Professional gamblers don't have to lie to the people they love about their whereabouts or behavior. Professional gamblers don't make promises they can't keep. Professional gamblers don't steal from family members. Professional gamblers don't commit illegal acts to support their gambling. Professional gamblers aren't inconsiderate and disrespectful and don't play the self pity card to get their way. Professional gamblers don't miss out on vacations or family events because they don't have the money. And they sure don't guilt trip anyone else into paying their way or feeling sorry for them because they can't afford to pay for themselves. How about relationships? Professional gamblers don't argue with their spouses over money and gambling. Professional gamblers don't manipulate and abuse the people they love. Professional gamblers don't leave household bills unpaid and the financial future of their spouse and children uncertain. Professional gamblers don't emotionally neglect marriages and parent child relationships, and they for sure are not behind on any child support. In my experience, the group that is most likely to buy into the idea of the professional gambler is parents. Not because they are naive, but because the weight they carry, the guilt, the shame, the embarrassment, the sorrow, and that deep sense of responsibility is enormous. Their desire to see their child as good, honest, capable, and hardworking can be overwhelming. And it's a very human thing to cling to anything that allows them to believe the best about their child. And often that's believing what their child is doing is professional in nature. Look, if you worked yourself to the bone to pay for your child's education and that opportunity was squandered, they barely graduated or left without a degree, never really entered the workforce, in essence, rubbing your hard work right in your face. But you tell yourself, man, though, he's really good at Texas Hold'em, like professional level. He played all through college, made good money. Well, I would say it's worth pausing. In situations like this, what families are often looking at is not a professional gambler, but a young person whose gambling has been supported by other people paying their living expenses like tuition, housing, food. And those are really, really expensive forms of financial support. Gambling funded that way isn't professional gambling, it's gambling without consequence. And if you were wondering, yes, this example relates to thousands out there because this age group represents one of the fastest growing demographics in gambling addiction today. The same applies if a child takes $10,000 from a credit card or account without permission to speculate on crypto or stocks, loses it, and later points out, brags about a gain he made months down the road as proof of trading skill. If that money was taken illegally and repayment never happens, that isn't professional trading. It's risky gambling behavior masked as talent. It's delusion. I see this pattern as well with married adult children who identify as entrepreneurs or self employed. Parents drain retirement savings to cover repeated financial shortfalls, often blaming spouses for not being supportive enough, while quietly tallying the money they've fronted for rent, living expenses, vacations, and entertainment. And then I'll hear, but hey, he's a hell of a blackjack player, professional level. He gets tournament invitations. But if his debts remain unpaid, what I'm seeing is not a professional gambler. I'm seeing someone whose gambling is being financially buffered by family. And for spouses, a common version sounds like this. My husband plays online poker and he's really good. No, he's good. He gets lots of offers. He won $10,000 last year. I saw the slip. And then he took me to this really nice B&B. We had a great weekend. I mean, how can I complain about his gambling if I'm benefiting too? He's a good father. He never forgets birthdays. He helps around the house once in a while. But then comes the rest of the story. He doesn't come to bed several nights a week. His paycheck is gone the day it hits the account unless it's hidden for bills. Otherwise, the bills don't get paid. Credit card debt keeps climbing. Medical care for children is questioned or minimized because we could use that money paying debt. And when concerns are raised, well, there is a lot of intimidation and threats. Let me tell you, at that point, labels don't matter. What matters is alignment between behavior, responsibility, and care. When gambling consistently undermines the safety, stability, and relationship trust, calling it professional doesn't make it so. That belief does not protect families, it just keeps them stuck. So, in a nutshell, professional gamblers don't sacrifice their relationships, their reputation, or their financial security in order to gamble. They don't sacrifice any of it. It's just not acceptable collateral damage. So, if you just listen to this list of what a professional gambler is not, and you found yourself tallying it up, well, yes on that one, but no on that one. No on that one, but maybe on that one, and yes on that one. Understand this is a pass fail. The conclusion is fairly straightforward. If you said yes to any of them, what you're looking at is not a professional gambler. More often, it's someone whose gambling has become problematic, but whose life has not yet been completely destroyed. And that yet matters. There's a member in the Denver GA room who refers to compulsive gambling as a disease of yets. And that description resonates with many of us. It's progressive. Over time, lines that once felt unthinkable, things that we would swear our gamblers would never do, will shift. Unless the gambling stops, those off limit behaviors have a way of slowly moving into the realm of possibility and then probability and then reality. So I guess the question is, do professional gamblers really exist at all? I honestly don't know because I've never knowingly met one. I did once know a set of parents whose two children gambled. One child struggled with a gambling addiction, and the other was often described as a professional gambler. That second child lived out of the country in a place where gambling access was much easier at the time. He did not rely on his parents to fund his gambling, which set his situation apart from his brother. Even so, that proximity to gambling appeared to really complicate and damage his relationships with his mom and dad and his brother. Eventually, I understand he stopped gambling professionally and moved back home, saying it had become increasingly difficult to separate gambling from the other illicit behaviors that tend to cluster around it. Was he a professional gambler? Maybe. I honestly couldn't say. What I do know is that Even in the one situation that might have fit the description, gambling still came at a cost. The Colorado Lottery emphasizes that its games are designed for entertainment and fun as part of its responsible gaming messaging, clearly framing participation as a leisure activity rather than a financial plan. If that is truly their position, then by their own definition, the idea of professional gambler doesn't really exist, or at the very minimum is rare. And in that case, it might be worth taking them at their word. After all, lotteries and gaming operators are deeply familiar with the statistics and probabilities involved. They know better than anyone how likely your gambler is to win or lose over time. I hope you heard at least one nugget today that helps you build or strengthen that bubble that protects your peace, joy, serenity, and financial security, regardless of what your gambler chooses to do. Join us for our next episode where we'll explore and try to better understand the recovery options that are available today. You have been listening to Survival Strategies for Anyone Who Loves a Gambling Addict, a production of BoundaryWise Consulting. Receive an alert when our next episode airs by following or subscribing on your podcast platform. The thoughts, opinions, and observations of the host are drawn from over 35 years of lived experience, involvement in state and local organizations, and industry awareness, as well as meaningful connections with thousands of spouses, parents, children, siblings, and friends whose lives were impacted by someone else's gambling. You can schedule an appointment with Jodi or learn more about our workshops and other services by emailing Jodi, Jodi, at boundarywiseconsulting.com. Thanks for listening.